Today's lesson is creating a gradient value scale using a colored pencil. So I'm going to use red because I think you'll be able to see it well. And what I'm going to do is gradually create a change in values going from my lightest value to my darkest value. But I want to do it seamlessly. I want to do it so that it's a gradient. And that means that the values are going to change without interruption. It's going to be like a smooth wave of values. So what I'm going to do is create the lightest pressure possible and just use that single light pressure throughout. I'm not going to press harder or lighter. I'm just going to press really light. And what I'm going to do is first start by creating that light pressure and shading the whole shape. Everything that I want to color, I'm going to shade. So I'm going to create the same amount of pressure. You can see that my arm is basically what's moving. I am not using my wrist or my fingers. I'm trying to move my arm kind of like a robot. The angle of my pencil is shallow. It's maybe about 15 degrees or so. And I'm just going back and forth. So you can see that this is my lightest value. And then from here, I'm going to start to get a little darker until I get to my darkest value here. So now that I know what my lightest value is going to be, I'm going to start at the other end and then push my darker values towards light. So we can obviously see right now that this side is darker here, right? And it's darker than this and it's darker than that area. So I'm going to continue to shade on this side here until it gets a little darker. And all I'm doing is creating layers. And by creating layers, two things will happen. One, the color is going to get darker, but the other thing that will happen is that the color will fill the texture of the paper. So part of the reason why you get a lighter value is because the white from the paper is coming through. You can see that a little bit here, that the white is coming through the red, and that helps to give the value more light. But the more values that I put over that, or the more layers I put over that, and the darker the value becomes, it also takes away from the white background. It fills it. So now I'm going to move a little bit further towards light. I'm going to start to get a little bit darker tone by comparison. So from around here towards this area, that's where my darker values are going to be. So I'm not going to go past right here. And again, I'm trying to do this as light as possible. It gives you the most amount of control. It prevents me from having to guess pressure, and it gives you a better sense and a better ability to gauge your values. So I'm going to spend a bit more time on my dark value now that I see how it's changing. Here, and I'm going to pump this value up pretty good. I want to see how dark I can get this value within reason, of course. When we work on values, one of the things that's important to understand is that the values need to relate to each other. They need to work in harmony with each other. So in a work of art, in something that we're working on, something that we're doing, we want those values to relate to each other without creating a shock. So if this value here is way too dark compared to the other values, it's going to be overpowering. So I want the value to be darker, I want it to be strong, but I want the other values to look like they relate to the same image. So I'm starting to get to the point here where I am reaching the maximum darkness that I can get out of this color. Okay, so that's about as dark as this red's going to get without me over forcing it. So what I'm going to do now, if this is my darkest, then I'm going to go towards my second darkest, and I'm going to fill more of that space and just try to soften the transition between the darkest and the second darkest. This may take you a little bit of time, and your eye certainly needs to get used to seeing these subtleties, but once you see it, once you develop a consciousness for what you're doing, you're going to have a lot more control and a lot more success, and you'll be able to get a wider range of values in anything that you do. Whether you're working in color, with pencils, with paint, or you're working with pencils or charcoal or any medium. A big part of success in learning how to control your values is being able to see a range of values. If you can't see a range of values, then it's very difficult to create a range of values. So I can see right there that darkness is transitioning to light. Now this is really light, compared to this. So it's not much darker than that. So I definitely need to push the value a bit more. And before I spend too much time on this, I can always come back to it. I can always make something darker. What I'm going to do is I'm going to push this value further along in my shape. I always want to compare, or as much as possible I want to compare. This is darker only because it's darker compared to something else, or it's lighter only because it's lighter compared to something else. Some of what we can do once we get to a point where maybe it doesn't seem like we can get any darker is change the direction of the stroke. So we can see quite a bit of light still coming through the texture, and if I change the direction, then I may be able to fill a bit more. I may create slightly more pressure, but it's very subtle. Your values are also going to be affected by how hard or soft your pencil is. If you have a very hard color, then it's going to be difficult to get to really darker values. So I do prefer using a softer pencil, but the most important thing is to do the best with what you have and to take your time with it, and if you can see those values change, then you know you're going in the right direction. You're doing a pretty good job. So we can definitely see that the colors are getting a little bit more intense. We can see that the color here is definitely changing, but it's changing gradually, and I can control it. The most important thing about all of this is being able to control what you're doing. And if you go slowly and softly, then that also prevents you from making a mistake that is more difficult to eliminate. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes, but if we can avoid them, and we have control and not have to go back a bunch of times to fix things, then that certainly makes our time and our effort much more efficient. So one of the most important things about shading and being able to have control in doing this well is the position of your hand. So you'll notice that my hand is fairly straight here, and then what I'm doing is hinging at the elbow. I am not hinging or moving my wrist or my fingers. All I'm doing is creating a smooth back and forth by moving my arm. What this does is gives me a lot more control. It makes it so that my hand, my fingers overall are soft and not rigid, and it also keeps me from getting tired. So because I'm moving my bigger muscles instead of my small muscles, then I can do this for a longer period of time without getting tired. And it allows me to also introduce the angle of the tool better. I am not holding the pencil at the tip. This also limits my range of motion, and it creates tension in my hand. So what I want to do is I give myself a couple of inches. The pencil is held right in between my index finger and middle finger, and it's just supported by my thumb ever so gently. And this action, this movement, gives you not only stability, but it keeps your hand relaxed, and it gives you a nice range of motion. So it allows you to move your hand without any restrictions. So this is a good exercise to develop your eye and being able to see the variety of values. So seeing a variety of values is really important and critical to be able to develop a variety of values. If you cannot see a variety of values, you're not going to be able to create a variety of values in your work. So the more of this that you do, even if it's to practice to do it, the better your artwork will be, because you'll be able to see and thus create a bigger range of values, and even subtle changes in values, because that most of the time is much more natural and accurate than really hard shifts or changes between the values. So subtlety in value changes is really important, and being able to see those value changes is critical to you being able to make those value changes. So what I'm doing here is I'm moving closer to the light values. I'm trying to see how smoothly, or hoping that I am making this transition smoothly. And I'll look at it and see if what I wanted to do is actually happening. If I see that there's a transition that is too abrupt, or that the values look too similar, and I can kind of do this with my hand or other pieces of paper, I can see how that transition is happening throughout, and that allows me to create focus on smaller areas. So what I see right now is that this area looks pretty good, but I need to work a little bit more on this area. I can see that this kind of change a little bit too abruptly. I want the transition between the first value the second value to be a little softer or maybe a little smoother. So I'm very gently going over those areas again. I want to make sure that I don't use any pressure. I'll be super light here, barely touching it. And I think I'm getting close to finishing this valley scale in a way that I think shows a good variety of values and a smooth transition and subtle transition between the values. So I think I'm pretty content with that. I'm happy with that.